The aroma of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies wafted through the air of Maple Lane, Golden Hills. To most, it would be an inviting scent of home and comfort. But in this pristine suburban neighborhood, those cookies were about to become evidence in a shocking criminal case. Maya Anderson, the newest resident of Golden Hills, had no idea that her simple gesture of neighborly kindness would land her in handcuffs, facing heinous accusations that threatened to destroy her life. But what sinister force was really at work in the manicured lawns and picture-perfect homes of Golden Hills? Why would a simple plate of cookies lead to flashing police lights and the click of handcuffs on Maya's wrists? Before we dive into this gripping story full of unexpected twists, tell us in the comments where you're watching or listening from today. And if you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The moving truck rumbled to a stop in front of 1542 Maple Lane, its engine cutting off with a final groan. Maya Anderson stepped out of the passenger side, her eyes sweeping across the picturesque street before her. Golden Hills was everything the real estate agent had promised, and perhaps a bit more. Row upon row of nearly identical houses lined the quiet street, their lawns manicured to perfection. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the neighborhood, highlighting the vibrant flowers that adorned each front yard. It was almost too perfect, Maya thought, like something out of a 1950s sitcom. As she stretched her arms above her head, working out the kinks from the long drive, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The street was eerily quiet for a summer afternoon. No children played on the pristine lawns, no neighbors chatted across fences. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. "Well, this is it," Maya murmured to herself, trying to inject some enthusiasm into her voice. At 35, she was ready for a fresh start, away from the bustle and noise of the city. Golden Hills promised peace, quiet, and a chance to put down roots in a community. As she began to unload boxes from the truck, Maya noticed a flicker of movement from the corner of her eye. Curtains twitched in nearby windows, briefly revealing curious faces before disappearing just as quickly. She smiled and waved, hoping to make a good first impression, but no one waved back. The unease that had been nagging at her grew stronger. Maya shook her head, trying to dispel the feeling. "It's just nerves," she told herself firmly. "They're probably just shy. Give it time." As the afternoon wore on and the moving truck departed, leaving Maya alone with her boxes and furniture, she couldn't help but notice the lack of welcoming neighbors. In her old apartment building, a new resident would have been greeted with casseroles and offers of help. Here, the doors remained firmly shut, the curtains drawn. Just as Maya was about to head inside for a break, she spotted movement on the sidewalk. A middle-aged woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair was walking a small, yappy dog. Maya's face broke into a relieved smile. Finally, a chance to meet one of her new neighbors. "Hi there," Maya called out, raising her hand in a friendly wave. "I'm Maya, just moved in today." The woman, who had been studiously avoiding eye contact, startled slightly at being addressed. She tugged her dog to a stop and turned to face Maya, a tight smile fixed on her face. "Oh, hello," she replied, her voice overly casual. "Ellen Whitaker. Welcome to the neighborhood." Maya stepped closer, eager for some human interaction after the lonely afternoon. "It's great to meet you, Ellen. I'm really excited to be here. Golden Hills seems like such a lovely place." Ellen's smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she gave Maya a once-over. "Yes, well, we don't see a lot of new faces around here," she said, her tone still carefully neutral, "especially ones like yours." The words hit Maya like a slap. She blinked, momentarily stunned by the thinly veiled racism in Ellen's statement. Part of her wanted to confront the woman, to demand an explanation, but the larger part, the part that was tired from moving and desperately wanted to make a good impression, forced a smile. "Well, I'm happy to be here," Maya said softly, her voice steady despite the hurt and anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I'm looking forward to getting to know everyone." Ellen nodded curtly, already tugging on her dog's leash. Yes, well, welcome to the neighborhood, she repeated, before hurrying off down the sidewalk. Maya watched her go, the excited butterflies in her stomach turning to lead. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that Ellen was just one person. Surely the rest of the neighbors wouldn't be like that. Over the next few days, Maya threw herself into unpacking and settling into her new home. She took long walks around the neighborhood, hoping to meet more of her neighbors and get a feel for the community. But with each outing, the eerie uniformity of Golden Hills became more apparent. Every lawn was mowed to the exact same height. The flowers in each garden bed seemed to be planted in the same patterns. Even the curtains in the windows looked similar from house to house. It was as if the entire neighborhood had been built from a single template, with no room for individuality. More unsettling was the lack of life on the streets. Maya never saw children playing outside or neighbors chatting over fences. The only people she encountered were like ghosts. They would appear briefly, wave with tight smiles that never reached their eyes, and then vanish back into their homes. On her third day in Golden Hills, Maya decided to visit the local grocery store. Surely there, she thought, she would have a chance to meet some of her neighbors in a more relaxed setting. But as she pushed her cart through the aisles, she found herself met with the same cool politeness she had experienced on the street. People nodded hello, but their smiles were strained. Conversations hushed as she approached, only to resume in whispers once she had passed. In the cereal aisle, she overheard two women talking in low voices. "Did you see her? In the Mitchell's old place?" "I know. What was the HOA thinking? Letting someone like that move in? Well, you know what they say. There goes the neighborhood." Maya's hand froze halfway to a box of cereal, her cheeks burning with a mix of shame and anger. She wanted to confront them, to defend herself. But what could she say? How could she fight against prejudices so deeply ingrained that these women felt comfortable voicing them in public? Instead, she finished her shopping as quickly as possible, keeping her head down and avoiding eye contact. As she loaded her groceries into her car, Maya caught sight of her reflection in the window. The face that looked back at her was tired, the eyes dulled by the constant low-grade stress of feeling unwelcome in her own neighborhood. "It's going to get better," she told her reflection firmly. "You just need to give it time. Show them you're a good neighbor. They'll come around." But as Maya drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a terrible mistake in moving to Golden Hills. The perfectly manicured lawns and identical houses suddenly felt less like a peaceful community and more like a prison of conformity. And Maya, with her dark skin and natural hair, was the glaring imperfection in their perfect world. Back at home, as Maya unpacked her groceries, she noticed movement on the porch next door. An older woman, probably in her late 40s, sat in a rocking chair, her sharp eyes fixed on Maya's house. This must be Edith, Maya realized, her next-door neighbor whom she had yet to meet. Maya raised a hand in greeting, but Edith didn't wave back. She simply continued to watch, her gaze cold and evaluating. Maya hurried inside, feeling exposed and vulnerable under that unwavering stare. As she closed the door behind her, Maya leaned against it, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. The weight of constant scrutiny, of always feeling like an outsider, was already starting to wear on her. But she was determined not to let it break her spirit. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "You belong here just as much as anyone else. Don't let them make you feel small." With renewed determination, Maya began to formulate a plan. She couldn't change the color of her skin or force her neighbors to accept her, but she could show them, through her actions, that she was a valuable member of the community. And she knew just where to start. Tomorrow, she decided, she would bake her mother's famous banana bread. Food had a way of bringing people together, of breaking down barriers. Maybe, just maybe, it would be the key to unlocking the closed doors of Golden Hills. As night fell over the neighborhood, Maya stood at her window, looking out at the quiet street. The houses were dark, save for the blue flicker of television screens. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The sound quickly hushed. Maya took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Tomorrow was a new day, a new chance to make connections. She wouldn't let the cool reception she had received so far deter her. This was her home now, and she was determined to make it work. With that thought firmly in mind, Maya turned away from the window and headed to bed. As she drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of a different Golden Hills, one filled with laughter, friendly faces, and the sweet smell of freshly baked banana bread. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect summer day in Golden Hills. Maya woke early, filled with a sense of purpose. Today was the day she would make her first real attempt to connect with her neighbors, starting with Edith next door. As she gathered the ingredients for her mother's banana bread, Maya hummed softly to herself. The familiar routine of measuring, mixing, and folding was soothing, bringing back warm memories of childhood afternoons spent in her mother's kitchen. "You catch more flies with honey than vinegar," her mother used to say. It was a lesson Maya had taken to heart, and one she hoped would serve her well in her new neighborhood. The sweet aroma of baking bread soon filled the house, chasing away the lingering smell of cardboard boxes and new paint. As the loaf cooled on the counter, Maya busied herself with getting ready for the day, choosing a cheerful yellow sundress that she hoped would reflect her optimistic mood. Finally, with the perfectly cooled loaf wrapped in a cheerful tea towel, Maya took a deep breath and headed next door. Her heart pounded as she climbed the steps to Edith's porch, but she forced a bright smile onto her face as she rang the doorbell. Long moments passed with no response. Maya was about to ring again when she heard the slow shuffle of footsteps from inside. The door opened a crack, revealing Edith's face. Her expression was neutral, betraying neither welcome nor hostility. "Yes?" Edith said, her tone flat. Maya's smile faltered slightly, but she pressed on. "Hi there. I'm Maya Anderson, your new neighbor. I just wanted to introduce myself properly and bring you a little welcome gift." She held out the banana bread. "It's my mother's recipe." Edith's gaze flicked from Maya's face to the bread and back again. She made no move to open the door further or to take the offering. "You're the new owner of the Mitchell place," she said. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded, her smile becoming a bit strained. "That's right, I moved in a few days ago. I'm really loving the neighborhood so far. It's so quiet and beautiful here." "We don't usually have too much turnover here," Edith replied, her tone still devoid of any warmth. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she looked Maya up and down. People tend to stay once they settle in. The implication was clear. People like you don't usually settle here. Maya felt her cheeks grow warm, but she refused to let Edith's coldness deter her. She held out the bread again. "Well, I'm looking forward to putting down roots here. I hope we can be good neighbors." Edith didn't reach for the bread. Instead, she opened the door a bit wider, stepping out onto the porch. Maya instinctively took a step back, feeling as though she was being pushed away without Edith having to lay a hand on her. "This place has always had a certain character," Edith said, her voice taking on an edge of steel beneath its polite veneer. "People here like things to stay the way they are. We don't take too kindly to disruptions." The weight of Edith's words hung in the air between them. Maya felt as though all the oxygen had been sucked out of the space, leaving her struggling to breathe. She opened her mouth to respond, to defend herself, but before she could form the words, Edith had already stepped back inside. "Thank you for the bread," Edith said flatly, not reaching for it. "Have a nice day." And with that, the door closed firmly in Maya's face. For a long moment Maya stood frozen on the porch, the banana bread still clutched in her hands. She felt as though she had been slapped, the sting of rejection burning across her cheeks. Slowly, she turned and made her way back to her own house, her steps heavy with disappointment. Once inside, Maya placed the rejected bread on her kitchen counter and sank into a chair. She buried her face in her hands, fighting back tears of frustration and hurt. How could Edith be so blatantly unwelcoming? How could anyone live with so much prejudice in their heart? As the day wore on, Maya tried to shake off the encounter with Edith. She unpacked more boxes, arranged and rearranged furniture, and tried to make her house feel more like a home. But the weight of Edith's words and the clear message of exclusion they carried hung over her like a cloud. In the afternoon, Maya decided to take another walk around the neighborhood, hoping the fresh air would clear her head. As she strolled down the sidewalk, she made a conscious effort to smile and wave at anyone she saw. Most people nodded back politely, but their smiles were tight and their eyes wary. At the corner, Maya ran into Ellen again, this time without her dog. Ellen's smile was brittle as she greeted Maya. "Settling in all right?" she asked, her tone suggesting she hoped the answer was no. Maya nodded, determined to remain positive. "Yes, thank you. Everyone's been very polite." It wasn't quite a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Ellen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, that's good to hear. We do pride ourselves on our manners here in Golden Hills." She paused, then added with a touch of venom, "Of course, it's always an adjustment when someone new moves in, especially someone so different." Maya felt her smile freeze on her face. "Different?" she repeated, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling up inside her. Ellen waved a hand vaguely. "Oh, you know, new faces, new ideas. It can be unsettling for a close-knit community like ours." Her tone made it clear that by new faces, she meant black faces. Before Maya could respond, Ellen was already moving away. "Well, mustache, book club meeting, you understand." And with that, she was gone, leaving Maya standing alone on the corner, feeling more isolated than ever. As Maya continued her walk, she noticed how the other residents seemed to melt away as she approached. Garage doors that had been open suddenly closed. People who had been working in their front yards suddenly remembered urgent tasks inside. It was as if she carried some contagious disease that everyone was afraid of catching. By the time she returned home, Maya's spirits were at an all-time low. She stood in her living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Maybe she should cut her losses, put the house back on the market and find somewhere more welcoming to live. But as quickly as the thought came, Maya pushed it away. No, she wouldn't let them win that easily. This was her home now, and she had every right to be here. If they wouldn't accept her, she would just have to find a way to change their minds. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across her lawn, Maya noticed movement next door. A young woman, probably in her late 20s, was retrieving her mail. Unlike the other neighbors, she didn't immediately hurry inside at the sight of Maya. Seizing the opportunity, Maya stepped out onto her porch. "Hi there," she called out, keeping her voice friendly but not too eager. "I'm Maya, I just moved in." The young woman looked up, a hesitant smile on her face. "Oh, hi, I'm Claire. Welcome to the neighborhood." For the first time since moving in, Maya felt a glimmer of hope. Claire's smile seemed genuine, her eyes free of the wariness Maya had come to expect. "Thanks," Maya replied. "It's nice to meet you." They chatted for a few minutes about inconsequential things, the weather, the local parks, the best place to get coffee. As they talked, Maya could see Claire relaxing, her initial hesitation fading. Just as Maya was about to invite Claire over for coffee, she saw Edith appear on her porch next door. The older woman's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene, her disapproval palpable even from a distance. Claire's demeanor changed instantly, her smile faded, and she began to fidget with her mail. "I should go," she said quickly, her eyes darting between Maya and Edith. "It was nice meeting you, Maya." Before Maya could respond, Claire had hurried inside, leaving her alone once again. Maya sighed, the brief moment of connection evaporating like mist in the morning sun. She turned to go back inside, but not before catching Edith's eye. The older woman's gaze was cold and calculating, and Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she had just witnessed something important. Later that evening, as Maya was preparing a solitary dinner, her doorbell rang. Surprised and a little wary, she approached the door, wondering who it could be at this hour. When she opened the door, she found Claire standing there, looking nervous but determined. "Hi," Claire said quickly, as if afraid she might lose her nerve. "Can we talk?" Maya nodded, stepping back to let Claire in. As they settled in the living room, Claire's eyes darted around, taking in the half-unpacked boxes and the general disarray of a new move. "I wanted to apologize for earlier," Claire began, her voice low. "And I wanted to warn you." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. "Warn me about what?" Claire took a deep breath. "About Edith. Look, I don't want to scare you, but Edith has a way of making things hard for people she doesn't like. She won't do it outright, but she'll find ways to make you wish you hadn't moved here." Maya's mind raced, thinking back to Edith's cold reception and the way the other neighbors had reacted to her. Is that why everyone's been so distant? Claire nodded, her expression grim. Edith's lived here forever. She's got a lot of influence. When she decides she doesn't want someone here, well, people tend to follow her lead. "But why?" Maya asked, frustration coloring her voice. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to live my life, to be a good neighbor." Claire's eyes filled with sympathy. "It's not about what you've done, it's about—" She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "It's about the color of my skin," Maya finished for her, her voice flat. Claire nodded, unable to meet Maya's eyes. "I'm sorry, I know it's not right, but that's how it is here in Golden Hills. Edith and some of the others, they think they're preserving the character of the neighborhood or some nonsense like that." Maya sat back, feeling as though the wind had been knocked out of her. She had suspected, of course, but hearing it confirmed so bluntly was still a shock. "So what am I supposed to do?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. "Just pack up and leave?" Claire shook her head emphatically. "No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I thought you should know what you're up against, so you can be prepared." Maya nodded slowly, her mind already working on a plan. "Thank you, Claire, for being honest with me, for being kind." As Claire left, Maya stood at the window watching the quiet street. The houses all looked the same in the gathering darkness, their windows glowing with warm light. But now Maya knew the truth. Behind those identical facades lay a web of prejudice and exclusion. But Maya was not one to back down from a challenge. If anything, Claire's warning had only strengthened her resolve. She would not be driven out. She would find a way to break through the barriers of prejudice and make a place for herself in Golden Hills. With newfound determination, Maya headed to the kitchen. She had an idea, one last attempt to extend an olive branch. Tomorrow she would bake cookies. Not just any cookies, but her grandmother's special chocolate chip recipe. If Edith and the others couldn't be swayed by kindness and good manners, maybe the irresistible aroma of freshly baked cookies would do the trick. As she gathered the ingredients, Maya allowed herself a small smile. She might be an outsider in Golden Hills for now, but she was far from defeated. Tomorrow would be a new day, a new chance to make connections and change minds. And Maya was ready for the challenge. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for baking. Maya woke early, her determination renewed after her conversation with Claire. She moved around her kitchen with purpose, gathering ingredients and preheating the oven. As she mixed the dough for her grandmother's famous chocolate chip cookies, Maya allowed herself to hope. Maybe this gesture would be the one to break through the icy facade of her neighbors. Maybe the simple act of sharing something sweet would soften their hearts. The aroma of vanilla and chocolate soon filled the house, chasing away the lingering smell of cardboard boxes and new paint. As the first batch cooled on the counter, Maya carefully arranged them in a decorative jar she had unpacked the day before. Taking a deep breath, Maya stepped out onto her porch. The street was quiet as usual, but she could feel eyes on her from behind curtains and blinds. Squaring her shoulders, she made her way next door to Edith's house. This time, when she rang the doorbell, Edith answered almost immediately. The older woman's eyes narrowed as she took in Maya and the jar of cookies in her hands. "Good morning, Edith," Maya said, forcing brightness into her voice. "I thought you might like these. They're my grandmother's special recipe." Edith didn't respond immediately. Instead, she pushed open her screen door and stepped out onto the porch, effectively forcing Maya to back up onto the lawn. Maya felt a flicker of unease at the maneuvering, but she held her ground, still holding out the jar of cookies. "You're persistent, aren't you?" Edith said, her tone somewhere between admiration and annoyance. Maya managed a small smile. "I just want us to be good neighbors," she said. "I know it can be unsettling when someone new moves in, but I promise I'm not here to cause any trouble." Edith's gaze was piercing as she studied Maya. "Trouble has a way of following certain people," she said, her words loaded with meaning. Maya felt her smile falter, but she pressed on. "I'm just here to live my life, same as anyone else," she said. "I thought maybe we could start over, get to know each other." For a long moment, Edith said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of great suffering, she reached out and took the jar of cookies. "Thank you, I suppose," she muttered, already turning back towards her door. Maya felt a spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was something. "I hope you enjoy them," she called out, as Edith retreated into her house. The door closed firmly behind Edith, leaving Maya standing alone on the perfectly manicured lawn. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It wasn't the warm reception she'd hoped for, but at least Edith had accepted the cookies. Maybe this was the first step towards breaking down the walls between them. With a lighter heart, Maya returned to her own house. She had done what she could for now. The rest was up to Edith and the other neighbors. As she closed her front door behind her, Maya allowed herself a small smile. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. But Maya's optimism was short-lived. Just 15 minutes after she had returned home, a loud, insistent knock echoed through her house. Puzzled, Maya made her way to the door. Had Edith had a change of heart? Was she coming to thank Maya for the cookies? As Maya opened the door, her hopeful smile froze on her face. Standing on her porch were 2 police officers, their expressions grim and official. "Ms. Anderson," the first officer asked, his voice clipped and professional. Maya nodded, a knot of dread forming in her stomach. "Yes, that's me. Is something wrong?" The second officer stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his belt, too close to his weapon for Maya's comfort. "We've received a report from your neighbor, Edith Carpenter. She claims you tried to poison her." Maya felt as though the ground had dropped out from beneath her feet. "What?" she gasped, her mind reeling. "That's impossible. I just gave her some cookies." The first officer's expression remained impassive. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. We have some questions we need to ask you." Maya's heart raced as panic set in. This couldn't be happening. It was absurd, unthinkable. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "I would never... I don't understand." But the officers were unmoved by her protests. "Please step outside, Ms. Anderson," the second officer said, his tone leaving no room for argument. As Maya stepped onto her porch, she became acutely aware of the neighborhood around her. Curtains twitched in windows, doors cracked open ever so slightly. It seemed every resident of Golden Hills was watching the scene unfold, their faces a mix of curiosity and smug satisfaction. The embarrassment and shame washed over Maya in a suffocating wave. This was worse than any nightmare she could have imagined. To be accused of such a heinous act, to be treated like a criminal in front of the entire neighborhood, it was almost too much to bear. "This is ridiculous," Maya said, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "I didn't do anything wrong." But her protests fell on deaf ears. The officers proceeded with the arrest, reading Maya her rights as they handcuffed her hands behind her back. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into her wrists, a physical reminder of the nightmare she found herself in. As the officers led her to their waiting patrol car, Maya caught sight of Edith standing on her porch. The older woman's face was a mask of righteous indignation, but Maya could have sworn she saw a flicker of satisfaction in those cold eyes. The last thing Maya saw as the police car pulled away was the perfectly manicured lawns and identical houses of Golden Hills. The neighborhood that was supposed to be her fresh start, her new home, had turned into a hostile battleground, and Maya was losing the fight before it had even truly begun. The ride to the police station was a blur for Maya. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the unthinkable situation she found herself in. How had a simple gesture of kindness, baking cookies for a neighbor, turned into this nightmare? At the station, Maya was led to a small, sterile interrogation room. The harsh fluorescent lights made her eyes ache, and the cold metal of the chair seemed to seep into her bones as she sat down. She felt small, vulnerable, and utterly alone. The two officers who had arrested her entered the room, their faces impassive. They sat across from Maya, their presence intimidating in the confined space. "Ms. Anderson," the first officer began, his voice cool and professional, "we need to ask you some questions about the incident with your neighbor, Edith Carpenter." Maya leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I would never try to poison anyone. I just baked some cookies." The second officer cut her off. "Ms. Anderson, we have some evidence we'd like you to explain." With that, he placed a small plastic bag on the table. Maya leaned closer, her heart sinking as she saw the contents. Inside the bag were several small yellow pellets. "Ms. Anderson," the first officer said, his voice grave, "your neighbor Edith reported finding these pieces of rat poison in the cookies you gave her. We also found a bottle of the same type of rat poison in your garden shed." Maya stared at the bag in disbelief, her breath catching in her throat. Rat poison. This had to be a mistake. She shook her head, her voice trembling as she tried to speak. "No, that's impossible," she said, desperation creeping into her tone. "I don't even have rat poison in my garden shed. I just moved in. I haven't even bought any garden supplies yet. This has to be a mistake." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. Maya could feel their doubt, their assumption of her guilt. To them, Edith was a respected member of the community, someone who had been there for years. Her word carried weight, and Maya was just the newcomer, the outsider. "Ms. Carpenter has been part of this neighborhood for decades," the second officer said, his tone making it clear where his sympathies lay. "She has no reason to lie about something like this." Maya felt tears of frustration prickling at the corners of her eyes. "And I have no reason to try to poison her," she exclaimed. "Why would I do that? I was just trying to be a good neighbor, to make friends in a new place. Please, you have to believe me." But her pleas seemed to fall on deaf ears. The officers continued their questioning, their tone growing increasingly skeptical with each of Maya's denials. They asked about her relationship with Edith, about any arguments they might have had. They wanted to know about Maya's background, her reasons for moving to Golden Hills. With each question, Maya felt herself sinking deeper into a pit of despair. How could she prove her innocence when the evidence seemed stacked against her? How could she fight against the prejudices and assumptions that had already condemned her in the eyes of her neighbors, and now, it seemed, in the eyes of the law? As the interrogation dragged on, Maya's mind raced. She thought of her job, her friends, her family. What would they think when they heard about this? How would this affect her life, her future? The weight of the situation pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. Finally, after what felt like hours, the officers informed Maya that she would be held overnight for further questioning. They needed to collect fingerprints, they said, and gather more evidence. As they led her to a holding cell, Maya felt utterly defeated. The cold, impersonal walls of the cell seemed to close in around her, a stark contrast to the warm, welcoming home she had hoped to create in Golden Hills. Sitting on the hard bench in the cell, Maya's thoughts swirled. How had this happened? How had a simple gesture of kindness turned into this nightmare? And more importantly, how was she going to prove her innocence? As the night wore on, Maya's desperation grew. She thought of Claire, the only person in Golden Hills who had shown her any kindness. Would Claire believe her? Would she be willing to stand up for Maya against the likes of Edith? Maya's mind raced through possible scenarios, trying to find a way out of this mess. But with each passing hour, the situation seemed more and more hopeless. The evidence against her, though fabricated, seemed damning. And in a community that had already decided she didn't belong, who would believe her word against Edith's? As dawn broke, casting weak light through the small window of her cell, Maya felt utterly alone. She had come to Golden Hills hoping for a fresh start, a chance to build a new life. Instead, she found herself trapped in a nightmare of prejudice and false accusations. But as the first rays of sunlight touched her face, Maya felt a spark of determination ignite within her. She might be down, but she wasn't out. Somehow, someway, she would prove her innocence. She would expose Edith's lies and show the true face of Golden Hills to the world. With this resolve burning in her heart, Maya squared her shoulders and prepared to face whatever the new day might bring. The battle wasn't over yet, and Maya Anderson was not one to go down without a fight. The morning brought little relief for Maya. As she was led from her holding cell, she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her. The officers' faces were grim, their manner brusque as they delivered the news she had been dreading. "Ms. Anderson, you're free to go for now, but this case is going to court." Maya felt the ground shift beneath her feet, her world tilting on its axis. Court, the word echoed in her mind, each repetition hammering home the reality of her situation. This wasn't just a misunderstanding that would blow over. It was the beginning of a long, arduous battle, one that would play out in the unforgiving arena of the legal system. As Maya made her way back to Golden Hills, she could feel the weight of the neighborhood's judgment pressing down on her. News traveled fast in small communities, and she knew that by now, everyone would have heard about her arrest. Her suspicions were confirmed as she turned onto her street. Curtains twitched in windows, and she could see people quickly averting their gaze as she passed. The few neighbors who were outside suddenly found urgent tasks to do inside their homes. Maya's heart sank as she approached her house. The once welcoming facade now seemed to loom over her, a symbol of her shattered dreams. As she fumbled for her keys, she heard a voice behind her. "Well, well, look who's back." Maya turned to see Ellen, the neighbor she had first met upon moving in. Ellen's smile was cold, her eyes gleaming with barely concealed satisfaction. "I heard about what happened," Ellen continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Such a shame. But you know we can't be too careful these days. You never know who might move in next door." Maya felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of shame and anger. She wanted to defend herself, to tell Ellen the truth, but the words stuck in her throat. What was the point? Ellen, like the rest of the neighborhood, had already made up her mind. As Ellen sauntered away, Maya could hear her voice carrying on the breeze as she spoke to another neighbor. "I always said there was something off about her. You can't trust these people, you know. They're not like us." Maya hurried inside, closing the door behind her and leaning against it. She slid to the floor, burying her face in her hands, as the tears she had been holding back finally broke free. The isolation she felt was overwhelming. In the span of just a few days, she had gone from being an optimistic newcomer to a pariah, shunned and feared by the very community she had hoped to join. As the day wore on, Maya found herself unable to leave the house. She peeked out the window occasionally, only to see neighbors quickly looking away or hurrying past her house. The once quiet street now seemed to buzz with whispered conversations and furtive glances. Just as Maya was considering ordering groceries to be delivered, anything to avoid facing the neighborhood, there was a soft knock at her door. Her heart racing, Maya approached cautiously. Who could it be? The police with more questions, Edith coming to gloat. To her surprise, when she opened the door, she found Claire standing there, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Can I come in?" Claire asked quietly, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being seen. Maya nodded, stepping back to allow Claire inside. As soon as the door closed behind them, Claire turned to Maya, her eyes filled with sympathy. "I don't believe any of it," Claire said firmly. "I know you wouldn't do something like that." Maya felt a rush of gratitude so strong it nearly brought her to tears again. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea how much that means to me." Claire's face darkened. "I wish I could do more, but people here, they've known Edith forever. They'll take her word over anyone else's, especially—" She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Especially someone who looks like me, Maya finished for her, her voice flat. Claire nodded, unable to meet Maya's eyes. I'm so sorry, I know it's not right, but that's how it is here in Golden Hills. Edith and some of the others, they think they're preserving the character of the neighborhood, or some nonsense like that. Maya sank onto her couch, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on her. So what am I supposed to do? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Just pack up and leave. Claire shook her head emphatically. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I thought you should know what you're up against, so you can be prepared. As Claire left, promising to do what she could to help, Maya stood at the window watching the quiet street. The houses all looked the same in the gathering darkness, their windows glowing with warm light. But now Maya knew the truth. Behind those identical facades lay a web of prejudice and exclusion that threatened to suffocate her. Maya's mind raced as she considered her options. She could leave, cut her losses and try to start over somewhere else. But the thought of letting Edith and the others win, of reinforcing their bigoted beliefs, made her blood boil. No, Maya decided. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't let them drive her out. Somehow, someway, she would prove her innocence and expose the true face of Golden Hills to the world. With newfound determination, Maya began to formulate a plan. She would fight this accusation with everything she had. She would show Golden Hills and the world that she was not someone to be pushed around or falsely accused. As night fell over the neighborhood, Maya stood tall in her living room, her resolve hardening. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning, and Maya Anderson was ready for the fight of her life. In the days that followed, Maya threw herself into preparing her defense. She pored over legal documents, researched similar cases, and reached out to every lawyer she could find. But with each passing day, the weight of the situation bore down on her more heavily. It wasn't just the legal battle she was facing. It was the constant, oppressive feeling of being watched, judged, and found wanting by everyone around her. Every time she stepped outside her house, she could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on her, could hear the whispers that followed in her wake. One afternoon, as Maya was returning from another frustrating meeting with a potential lawyer, she saw Claire hurrying towards her house. The younger woman looked around nervously before knocking on Maya's door. Once inside, Claire's words tumbled out in a rush. "I've been doing some digging," she said, her voice low as if afraid of being overheard. "Maya, this isn't the first time something like this has happened in Golden Hills." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you mean?" Claire took a deep breath. "Edith. She's done this before, not the poisoning accusation specifically, but she's driven out other families. Families that didn't fit her idea of who should live here." "You mean non-white families?" Maya said flatly. Claire nodded, her expression grim. "She never goes after people openly, but she's driven out a few families over the years, especially those who don't fit the look of the place." Maya sank onto her couch, her mind reeling. How does she do it, and how has no one stopped her? "It's always subtle," Claire explained. "Constant complaints to the HOA, spreading rumors, making people feel unwelcome in 1,000 small ways. And the thing is, most people here, they don't exactly disagree with her. They might not be as active about it, but they're not upset to see the neighborhood stay the way it is." Maya felt a surge of anger and determination. "We need to expose this," she said firmly. "Not just for me, but for everyone she's hurt." Over the next few weeks, Maya and Claire worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. They dug into old property records, talked to former residents who had moved away, and pieced together a disturbing pattern. Several non-white families had moved into Golden Hills over the years, only to leave within months, citing vague, personal reasons. But as Maya and Claire dug deeper, they uncovered a web of harassment and discrimination that had driven these families out. One former resident, a Hispanic man named Carlos, told them about the constant noise complaints filed against his family, despite their quiet lifestyle. An Asian American couple recounted how their children were excluded from neighborhood activities and playdates, but it wasn't just Edith. As they delved deeper, Maya and Claire uncovered a systemic conspiracy involving several longtime residents. These people worked together to maintain Golden Hills as a predominantly white neighborhood, using a combination of social pressure, manipulation of local officials, and subtle but persistent harassment. "I can't believe this has been going on for so long," Maya said one evening, as she and Claire pored over their gathered evidence. "How has no one spoken up?" Claire's face was a mask of guilt and shame. "Because people like me stayed quiet," she said softly. "I've known about this for years, but I was too afraid to speak out. I thought if I stayed quiet, it wouldn't affect me." Maya reached out and squeezed Claire's hand. "But you're speaking out now," she said firmly. "That's what matters." The more they uncovered, the more Maya's resolve strengthened. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about exposing a long-standing injustice and fighting for change. As the date of her court appearance drew near, Maya and Claire prepared to bring their evidence to light. They knew it would be an uphill battle. They were up against not just Edith, but an entire system that had been in place for decades. But Maya was ready for the fight. She had come to Golden Hills looking for a home, for a community. Instead, she had found a battle that needed to be fought. And Maya Anderson was not one to back down from a challenge. Tomorrow she would step into the courtroom, not just as a defendant, but as someone ready to expose the truth about Golden Hills. She would fight not just for herself, but for every family that had been driven out, every person who had been made to feel unwelcome in their own home. The morning of the trial dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil in Maya's heart. As she dressed in her most professional attire, she could feel the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Today wasn't just about proving her innocence. It was about exposing the deep-rooted prejudice that had poisoned Golden Hills for far too long. The courthouse was packed as Maya entered, flanked by her lawyer, Lisa Daniels. She could feel the eyes of the community on her, a mix of curiosity, judgment, and barely concealed hostility. In the front row, Edith sat primly, her face a mask of righteous indignation. As the trial began, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. The prosecution presented their case first, painting Maya as a hostile newcomer who had attempted to harm a beloved member of the community. Edith took the stand, her voice trembling with emotion as she recounted her version of events. "I don't know why she would do this to me," Edith sobbed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never did anything to her. I was just trying to be a good neighbor." Maya watched in disbelief as Edith's performance swayed the courtroom. She could see the sympathy in the eyes of the jury, the nods of agreement from the spectators. The judge, an older man with a stern countenance, listened intently, occasionally nodding as Edith spoke. As Edith's testimony continued, Maya felt a growing sense of despair. The case seemed to be slipping away from her. Despite all their preparation, despite the evidence they had gathered, it seemed that Edith's word carried more weight than truth itself. When it was finally time for the defense to present their case, Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Lisa Daniels approached the bench, her face a mask of determination. "Your Honor," Lisa began, "the defense would like to present evidence that not only exonerates my client, but exposes a long-standing pattern of discrimination and harassment in the community of Golden Hills." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Maya could see Edith shifting uncomfortably in her seat, her usual composure cracking slightly. Lisa proceeded to lay out the evidence Maya and Claire had gathered. She presented testimony from former residents who had been driven out of Golden Hills, documents showing selective enforcement of HOA rules, and records indicating a pattern of biased police responses. As the evidence mounted, Maya could see the shock and disbelief on the faces of the jury. Even the judge, who had seemed predisposed to believe Edith, was now leaning forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. But just as it seemed the tide was turning in Maya's favor, the prosecution objected, arguing that this evidence was irrelevant to the case at hand. The judge, after a moment's consideration, agreed, instructing the jury to disregard much of what they had heard. Maya felt her heart sink. They had come so close, only to be shut down at the last moment. As Lisa returned to her seat, Maya could see the frustration and disappointment on her face. The trial continued, but Maya felt as though she was watching it from a distance. The words of the lawyers, the reactions of the jury, it all seemed to blur together. Was this how it would end? Would Edith's lies triumph over the truth? As the final arguments were being prepared, a commotion at the back of the courtroom caught everyone's attention. The doors burst open, and a familiar figure strode in. It was Claire. All eyes in the courtroom turned to Claire as she made her way purposefully towards the front. Maya felt a surge of hope mixed with confusion. What was Claire doing? The judge, visibly annoyed by the interruption, addressed her sharply. "Ms. Hastings, please take a seat if you're here to observe. We're in the middle of proceedings." But Claire didn't sit. Instead, she approached the bench, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady. "Your Honor, I need to speak. There's something you all need to hear." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Maya could see Edith shifting uncomfortably in her seat, her usual composure cracking. "Order in the court," the judge commanded, banging his gavel. He turned his stern gaze to Claire. "Young lady, this is highly irregular. We're in the middle of a trial." "I know, Your Honor," Claire replied, her voice gaining strength. "But what I have to say is directly relevant to this case. It's about the truth behind what's really happening in Golden Hills." The judge considered for a moment, his brow furrowed. Finally, he nodded. "Very well, but make it quick and understand that you're now under oath." Claire took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice, initially shaky, grew stronger with each word. "I've lived in Golden Hills my entire life," she began, "and in all that time, I've watched as people like Edith Carpenter have systematically driven out anyone they deemed undesirable." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Edith's face paled, her eyes darting nervously between Claire and the judge. "I've seen it happen time and time again," Claire continued. "Families move in hoping for a fresh start, only to be harassed, isolated, and eventually forced out. And it's not just Edith. There's a whole group of long-time residents who work together to keep Golden Hills, well, golden." Claire then pulled out her phone. "I have proof. Text messages from our neighborhood group chat, where Edith and others discussed their plans to get rid of Maya. They saw her as a threat to their idea of what our community should look like." The judge leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Ms. Hastings, are you willing to submit those messages as evidence?" Claire nodded firmly. "Yes, Your Honor, and there's more. I have records of HOA complaints, selectively enforced against minority homeowners. I have testimonies from former residents who were driven out, and I have my own eyewitness account of how Edith has treated Maya and others before her." As Claire spoke, Maya could see the shock and disbelief on the faces of the jury. Even the judge, who had seemed predisposed to believe Edith, was now listening intently, his expression grave. "Your Honor," Claire said, her voice thick with emotion, "I can't stay silent anymore. What happened to Maya? It's not an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern, a system designed to keep people out based on nothing more than the color of their skin. And I'm ashamed that it took me this long to speak up." The courtroom was silent as Claire finished speaking. Maya felt a mix of emotions: relief that the truth was finally coming out, gratitude towards Claire for her bravery, and a renewed sense of hope that justice might actually be served. The judge turned to Edith, his expression stern. "Ms. Carpenter, do you have any response to these allegations?" Edith, her composure completely shattered, sputtered incoherently. That's not... She's lying. This is all a conspiracy against me." But her protests fell flat in the face of Claire's evidence and testimony. The jury exchanged meaningful glances, and Maya could see that the tide had turned. The judge called for a brief recess to review the new evidence. As the courtroom buzzed with excited whispers, Maya caught Claire's eye and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." Claire nodded, a small smile on her face despite the tears in her eyes. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The prosecution, faced with the new evidence, struggled to maintain their case against Maya. Edith, once the picture of a wronged innocent, now sat slumped in her chair, avoiding eye contact with everyone. In light of Claire's testimony and the new evidence, the jury didn't take long to reach a verdict. As the foreman stood to deliver it, Maya held her breath. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Maya Anderson, not guilty of all charges." A wave of relief washed over Maya. She felt tears spring to her eyes as the weight of the past weeks lifted from her shoulders. But the judge wasn't finished. "In light of the evidence presented by Ms. Hastings," he announced, his voice stern, "I am ordering a full investigation into the practices of the Golden Hills Homeowners Association and the conduct of certain residents, including Edith Carpenter. This court will not tolerate systemic discrimination and harassment." As the courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and shocked gasps, Maya sat in stunned silence. It was over. She had been vindicated. But more than that, the truth about Golden Hills had finally been exposed. In the days following the trial, Golden Hills was in turmoil. The community, once a picture of suburban perfection, was now fractured and reeling from the revelations of the trial. Maya found herself at the center of it all. Some neighbors, those who had always felt uncomfortable with the status quo but had been too afraid to speak up, rallied around her. They brought casseroles, offered apologies, and expressed their hopes for a new, more inclusive Golden Hills. Others, however, remained hostile. They viewed Maya as the catalyst that had destroyed their way of life, refusing to acknowledge the inherent injustice of the system that had been exposed. Edith and her closest allies faced legal consequences, but their influence still lingered in the whispers and sidelong glances of those who shared their views. As the dust began to settle, Maya found herself faced with a difficult decision. Despite her vindication, despite exposing the truth, she couldn't help but wonder if she could ever truly feel at home in Golden Hills. The memory of those first terrible weeks, the isolation and fear, still lingered. One evening, as Maya sat on her porch contemplating her future, she saw Claire approaching. The younger woman had become a true friend through this ordeal, and Maya felt a rush of gratitude as she waved her over. "How are you holding up?" Claire asked, settling into a chair next to Maya. Maya sighed, looking out over the quiet street. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Part of me wants to stay, to be part of making Golden Hills better. But another part wants to run as far away as possible," Claire finished with a wry smile. Maya nodded. "Is it crazy to think about leaving after everything we went through to stay?" Claire was quiet for a moment, considering. "I don't think it's crazy," she said finally. "You've been through a lot. No one would blame you if you decided this place held too many bad memories." After a pause, Claire added, "Did you hear about Edith?" Maya shook her head, curious. "She was found guilty," Claire explained. "False accusations and conspiracy to discriminate. The judge really came down hard on her. She has to pay a huge fine and do hundreds of hours of community service, all focused on promoting diversity and inclusion. Can you believe it?" Maya's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Wow, that's fitting, I suppose." Claire nodded. "That's not all. Word is she's selling her house, can't face the new neighbors or the shame, I guess. She's moving away from Golden Hills." Maya sat back, processing this information. Edith's departure felt like the closing of a chapter, the end of an era in Golden Hills. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the sun began to set over the rooftops of Golden Hills. "But you know," Claire continued, "if you did decide to stay, well, I think you could really make a difference here. You've already started to change things, and there are people here who would stand with you." Maya turned to look at her friend, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. She thought about the other neighbors who had come forward after the trial, expressing their support and their hopes for change. She thought about the children in the community and how staying and fighting for inclusivity might make their futures brighter. In that moment, Maya made her decision. It wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But she had come to Golden Hills looking for a home, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. "I'm staying," she said, her voice firm with resolve. This is my home now, and I'm going to fight to make it better. Claire's face broke into a wide smile. I was hoping you'd say that, she said, reaching out to squeeze Maya's hand. In the weeks that followed, Maya threw herself into community activism. With Claire's help, she organized meetings to discuss how to make Golden Hills more welcoming to all. They worked on revising HOA policies and planned inclusive community events. It wasn't always easy. There were still those who resisted change, who clung to the old ways. But slowly, surely, Maya began to see a shift in the community. New families moved in, bringing diversity and fresh perspectives. The Patels from India, the Rodriguezes from Mexico, the Nguyens from Vietnam, and the Kims from Korea all found homes in Golden Hills. The once silent streets began to buzz with a blend of languages, the sounds of children from various backgrounds playing together, and neighbors of all cultures chatting across fences. One sunny Saturday morning, almost a year after the trial, Maya stood in her kitchen, putting the finishing touches on a batch of her grandmother's famous chocolate chip cookies. As she carefully arranged them on a platter, she couldn't help but smile at the irony. These cookies, once used as a weapon against her, were now a symbol of healing and community. She was taking them to welcome a new family that had just moved in down the street. As she stepped out onto her porch, platter in hand, Maya took a deep breath, savoring the warm summer air and the sense of belonging that had finally, truly, settled over her. Golden Hills was far from perfect. There was still work to be done, prejudices to overcome, and wounds to heal. But as Maya made her way down the street, waving to neighbors and hearing the laughter of children playing in front yards, she knew that she had made the right choice in staying. This was her home now. And together with allies like Claire and others who believed in change, Maya was determined to make Golden Hills live up to its name, not as a haven of exclusivity, but as a truly golden community, welcoming to all. As she approached the house of the new family, Maya squared her shoulders and smiled. It was time to extend the hand of true neighborliness, to offer not just cookies, but the promise of a community striving to be better. With each small act of kindness, each stand against injustice, Maya knew they were building a better future for Golden Hills, one cookie at a time. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Golden Hills. If you enjoyed Maya's story of perseverance and community transformation as much as we did, I've handpicked another tale I know you'll love. Please don't miss it. Click here to watch it next.